He's so technical with his striking and so dangerous and so game.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I am breaking down the complete UFC history of Petr No Mercy Yan and how he proved that an underdog can climb all the way to the top and even get back there again. I'm going to walk you through his journey step by step, from his early days in Russia to winning the UFC Bantamweight belt, losing it in the worst way, and then rebuilding himself into a champion again. Before Petr Yan ever set foot in the UFC octagon, he was grinding on the regional scene in Russia. He fought in promotions like ACB, where he faced tough opponents and quickly built a name as a sharp, aggressive striker with serious boxing skills. One of the biggest parts of his early career was his rivalry with Magomed Magomedov. Yan lost a close split decision to him in March 2016 in a 5-round fight, then came back in April 2017 and beat Magomedov by unanimous decision in another 5-round war. That comeback win showed his mindset early on. If he lost, he did not fold. He came back smarter, tougher, and more dangerous. By the time the UFC called, his record was strong, and people who followed MMA closely already knew this guy was a problem. Yan made his UFC debut on June 23, 2018 at UFC Fight Night Cowboy vs. Edwards in Singapore. I love this debut because he did exactly what an underdog wants to do. He made a loud statement. Yan dropped Ishihara and finished him by TKO in the first round at 328, mixing sharp boxing and nasty ground and pound. It was fast, violent, and clean, and right away fans started paying attention to this new Russian bantamweight. Just a few months later, on September 15, 2018, Yan fought Jin Soo's son at UFC Fight Night Hunt vs. Olenek. This fight turned into a wild brawl at times, but Yan's pressure and volume helped him win a unanimous decision after 3 rounds. To close out the year, he took on Douglas Silva de Andrade at UFC 238 on December 29, 2018. Yan punished de Andrade on the feet and on the ground until the corner stopped the fight after the second round, giving Yan another TKO win and pushing his UFC record to 3-0. By the end of 2018, he was no longer just some new Russian guy. He was a real contender, rising fast.
In 2019, Yan started facing bigger names and more experienced opponents. On February 23, 2019, at UFC Fight Night Blachowicz vs. Santos, he fought John Dodson, a former title challenger known for his speed and power. Dodson is hard to hit clean and even harder to look good against, but Yan walked him down and outworked him over 3 rounds, winning by unanimous decision. That fight showed Yan's patience, defense, and ability to deal with explosive counters. Next came Jimmy Rivera at UFC 238 on June 8, 2019. Rivera was a tough, ranked bantamweight with strong boxing and low kicks, but Yan stayed composed and once again won a clear unanimous decision after 3 rounds. At this point, he was 5-0 in the UFC and moving quickly toward the top. Then came a huge showcase at UFC 245 on December 14, 2019, when Yan fought Uriah Faber, a Hall of Famer and legend of the lighter weight classes. After controlling most of the fight, Yan dropped Faber and finished him with a brutal head kick and punches early in the 3rd round. That knockout made it obvious that Yan was not just a prospect anymore. He was a serious threat to the belt. The big moment came at UFC 251 on July 12, 2020 on Fight Island. Yan faced José Aldo for the vacant UFC Bantamweight title. Aldo was one of the greatest fighters ever and a longtime former featherweight champion, so even moving down to 135, he was a huge name and a dangerous opponent. The fight started competitive, with Aldo landing good shots and showing his veteran skill. But as the rounds went on, Yan's pressure, cardio, and boxing began to take over. By the 5th round, Yan had fully taken control. He hurt Aldo, put him on the ground, and unleashed heavy ground and pound until the referee stepped in for a TKO at 324 of the final round. With that finish, Petr Yan became the UFC Bantamweight champion. For a guy who entered the UFC as an under-the-radar fighter from Russia, beating someone like Aldo for the belt was the perfect underdog moment. He proved that his climb up the ladder was real and that his style could beat a legend. Yan's first title defense was against Aljamain Sterling at UFC 259 on March 6, 2021. Going into the fight, many people thought Yan's striking and fight IQ would carry him, while Sterling's main path was takedowns, pressure, and back control. Sterling came out fast, using wild movement and constant attempts to drag the fight to the mat. Over time, though, Yan adjusted and started to look more comfortable, stuffing takedowns and landing strong counters. Then everything changed in one single moment. In the fourth round, with Sterling clearly grounded on one knee, Jan threw an illegal knee to his head. Sterling could not continue, and the referee had no choice but to stop the fight and call a disqualification. Because of that foul, Sterling became champion, and Jan lost his belt, not by being outclassed or knocked out, but by making a costly mistake. For an underdog who had fought so hard to reach the top, losing the title like that was heartbreaking and instantly turned their rivalry into one of the biggest stories in the division. Jan did not sit out for long. On October 30th, 2021, at UFC 277, he faced Corey Sandhagen for the interim bantamweight title after Sterling was not ready to return. Sandhagen is tall, creative, and dangerous with flying knees and spinning strikes, but Jan once again showed why people call him one of the most technical strikers in MMA. Over 5 rounds, he mixed pressure, sharp punching, and smart defense to win a unanimous decision. All 3 judges scored at 49-46 for Jan, giving him the interim belt and proving he was still at the top of the division. That set up the rematch with Aljamain Sterling at UFC 273 on April 9, 2022. This time there were no fouls, just a hard, honest fight. Sterling used his grappling game plan, taking Jan's back and controlling him on the ground for long stretches, especially in the middle rounds. Jan came back strong in the later rounds and had success in the striking, but when the scorecards were read, Sterling won by split decision. It was close, and many fans argued about the result, but officially, Jan now had a DQ loss and a split decision loss to the same rival. For his story, this was the low point. The former champ and interim champ suddenly looked like the underdog again.
After the Sterling rematch, Jan faced one of the biggest rising stars in the division, Sean O'Malley, at UFC 280 on October 22, 2022. This fight was a huge test for both of them. O'Malley wanted to prove he could beat top competition, and Jan needed a statement win to get back into title talks. The fight turned into a high-level 3-round striking battle, with both fighters landing heavy shots and having strong moments. When the judges' scores were announced, O'Malley won by split decision, and once again the result was very controversial among fans and media. A lot of people felt Jan had done enough to win, but the official record gave him another close loss. Then came Merab Dvalishvili at UFC Fight Night Jan vs. Dvalishvili on March 11, 2023. Merab is known for insane cardio, non-stop takedown attempts, and constant pressure. Over 5 rounds, he used that style perfectly. He kept shooting, clinching, and throwing volume, making Jan work the entire time. Jan showed heart and toughness like always, but Merab's pace and wrestling earned him a clear, unanimous decision win. This was not a fight where you could blame the judges. It was a straight-up tough loss to a stylistic nightmare. For many fighters, losing a title by disqualification, then dropping a split decision, another split decision, and then a clear decision to a cardio monster like Merab might be the start of a downhill slide. For Petr Yan, it turned into the start of his comeback. On March 9, 2024, at UFC 299, O'Malley vs. Vera 2, he fought Song Yadong, a young, powerful striker with real knockout power. This was a risky matchup because Song is dangerous on the feet, but Jan used his experience, footwork, and boxing to outpoint him over 3 rounds and win a unanimous decision. Later that year, on November 23, 2024, he headlined UFC Fight Night Jan vs. Figueiredo against former flyweight champion Deiveson Figueiredo. A lot of fans were curious about how Figueiredo would look at bantamweight and whether Jan could deal with his explosiveness. Over 5 rounds, Jan put on a smart, measured performance, controlling the pace, landing the cleaner shots, and winning another unanimous decision win. Beating a former champion from another division was a huge boost for his confidence and his ranking. Then, on July 26, 2025, he faced Marcus McGee at UFC Fight Night Whitaker vs. De Reeder. Once again, Jan showed why experience matters. He shut down McGee's offense, stayed calm under pressure, and picked him apart over 3 rounds to earn yet another unanimous decision win. With 3 straight victories over a dangerous contender, a former champ, and a rising name, Jan had rebuilt himself from a struggling ex-champ into a clear top-tier threat again. All of that set up the perfect storyline for UFC 323, Dvalishvili vs. Jan 2 on December 6, 2025. Merab had already beaten Jan once and was known for breaking opponents with pace and wrestling. The first fight had been one-sided, so a lot of people came into the rematch doubting whether Jan could handle that style, but this is where his underdog spirit really showed. In the rematch, Jan came in with better takedown defense, a sharper game plan, and more patience. Instead of letting Merab dictate everything, Jan picked his shots, defended key takedowns, and made Merab pay with counters. Over 5 rounds, the fight stayed competitive, but this time Jan did enough to convince all 3 judges, winning by unanimous decision and completing one of the best comebacks in modern bantamweight history.
With that win, Petr Yan became UFC Bantamweight champion again, proving that his original rise was not a one-time thing. He showed that an underdog can fall, learn, and climb the mountain twice. When you look at Petr Yan's complete UFC history, it is not just a story of straight success. It is a story of ups and downs. He comes in as a relative unknown from Russia, beats tough names like John Dodson, Jimmy Rivera, and Uriah Faber, then stops José Aldo to win the title. He loses the belt by disqualification in a fight he was starting to control, wins interim gold, loses a close rematch, drops another split decision to Sean O'Malley, and gets outpaced by Merab Dvalishvili in their first fight. Most fighters would be broken by that run, but Yan instead rebuilt himself with wins over Song Yadong, Davison Figueiredo, and Marcus McGee, and then comes back and beats Merab in a rematch to reclaim the bantamweight title at UFC 323. That is why his story hits so hard. It shows that being an underdog is not about never losing. It's about taking hard losses, owning your mistakes, and still believing you belong with the best in the world. So now that you know Petr Yan's complete UFC history, let me know in the comments which fight from his journey is your favorite and who you think he should defend the belt next.